Lynn Cullen live in 1 minute. Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com. Email your questions and comments to Lynn at pghcitypaper.com.
Hello and a good morning at ya. It's Monday, the 16th of June, and I feel like I'm sort of beginning the rest of my life. This is the first, I think, this will be the first full week, and I got myself dressed by myself. I took a shower by myself. Unfortunate, perhaps, but I also got this gizmo on and off by myself. I'm definitely feeling better. I'll have this thing mastered by the time they finally say you can take it off. So, I'm feeling more like myself, and needless to say, I'm in a good mood. I'm also in a good mood because somebody just sent me, I showed Jess, we haven't listened to it at all. I just got something from a professor of history at Boston College who sent me a video of me interviewing him in 1978 on a show I did called Live at 5. Live at 5, which was a half-hour show. That's the show that Iggy Pop was on. And, we had some doozies on that show. Timothy Leary. And this guy. And I have absolutely zero video of that show. I have a few still photos. I have no video. And he just sent me video. I'll maybe look at it, might put it up somewhere where you guys can see it because it's a riot. And Jess was saying, well, what'd you say? Did he maybe VCR? I couldn't figure out how he got this. And were there VCRs in 1978? I don't have any sense that we could capture a television program back then. So no, I'm not sure how he got it, but I'm glad he did because, and in the background you see that huge old funky weather map where I made my first appearance on TV and famously showed my long underwear. It's all there, my whole life. Anyway. So I'm all excited about that. He said I came across this the other day. I've been interviewed a bunch of times since, but never by anyone smarter. Yeah, well, back in 78, I had some brain cells that were still operating. And he says, I think, as I recall, you were about to leave Madison for Detroit. No. Oh, yes. He's talking about the fact that I was going to Detroit for to cover the Republican National Convention. Does that make sense? No. That would have been in 1980. Oh, well, it doesn't matter, but wow, what a blast from the past. It's so exciting. Sometimes it's great to have much of your professional career captured on video or audio, and of course sometimes it's horribly embarrassing, humiliating, and worthy of blackmail. So the big story, I mean, if you guys want to talk about news today, the big story, of course, is Iraq, Gesundheit, and this new group we now all have been introduced to, ISIS. You know, I was thinking, and what do I know? But I do read more probably about geopolitics than the average American. I'm going to remove that probably. I know I read more about geopolitics than the average American. And I think, and I couldn't go toe-to-toe with any expert on the subject, but it is my sense that what we have in the Middle East now is an entire failed hunk of the globe. I mean, we've heard the term failed state before, where a country simply is not governable, or its government is incapable of governing, where anarchy holds sway, where terrorists can not only get a foothold, but in fact a stronghold, and from there do their nefarious bidding in other places. And there was concern about the failed states of Africa, the failed states of the Middle East. But the more you look at those two regions, I hate to sort of insert Africa in that, although I am, because some of these failed states are in northern Africa that I'm thinking of, northern and northwestern Africa, and then all of those countries in what we, in our heads, I think, call the Middle East. Some that are not failed states are living in this failed neighborhood of states and must be terrified at the violence that is so close. You cannot, if you have ever visited Syria or Jordan or Israel, it is mind-boggling when you're standing in one of those countries to see how close other countries are to you. I stood on a spot in northern Israel, and I could see very easily there was Syria, and I'm trying to think what was the other country. I also was in the southern part of Israel, where I could see Jordan across the water that was in front of me. I could see, looking down to my right, I could see part of Egypt, and then Syria was there. It is. So if things are going awry in Syria, let me tell you, the spillover, it would be difficult to contain that. And we're seeing that. It's not containable. And so with what is happening in Syria now, who would know the Arab Spring would give rise to this, right? It is the Arab Spring that resulted in the uprising against Syrian despot Assad, who would not cave like others before him, who sent his country into this horrific civil war which, of course, attracted a lot of folks in that neighborhood who wanted to make use of this anarchy. And now we're seeing what happens. Because the folks that were in Syria now are the ones that are in Iraq now. Iran is now on the same side of this particular mess as we are. This is a failed part of the globe. And I don't see how anyone is supposed to... It seems to me the best thing to do would be to stand back. I don't know. Back away. Back away. There ain't no fixing it. There's no fixing it from the likes of us or Europe or anybody else. This is a population that lives in countries that are phony countries to start with. The geography of that whole area was simply imposed upon it after World War I and then, to a certain extent, after World War II by the big countries in the world. And borders were drawn. These terrorists have do not recognize these borders, nor, frankly, should they. They're artificial and they're meaningless. And we're now seeing how meaningless they are. The real borders, it seems, are ideological and religious. And this is... I mean, I think what we're seeing is a sort of an Islamic civil war, Sunni on Shia. But this sense that we can do anything about it seems to me absurd. We have some guilt, I think, in that we did go into this failed neighborhood with the arrogance that was the hallmark of the Bush-Cheney regime. We went in there to teach them how to make a democracy, supposedly. And we spent unbelievable amounts of blood and money in the process. And look what we got. Mission accomplished. Mission accomplished. Good God. I don't know. These are just thoughts I have. And I read a piece in the New York Times Magazine yesterday about the fact that the Middle East is not the most troublesome part of the globe if you ask the people at Homeland Security. Where they see the biggest threat are in these failed states of Africa. But it's very humbling if you're of the American mindset that we're the police officers of the globe and somehow have the will and or the ability to fix these things or even to contain them. It's sort of like if you were to look at the whole globe, there's a wildfire, an extraordinary wildfire in the Euphrates Valley and beyond. And it can't be contained, I don't think. It has to be allowed to burn. Scary stuff. Scary stuff. It's scary for everybody. If you think the Jordanians aren't scared out of their minds, if you think the Israelis aren't scared out of their minds, Egypt right now is pretty much a failed state. Libya, failed state. And there's a lot of trouble happening in Libya right now. We don't really necessarily pay attention. Sudan, failed. Now we have South Sudan. That ain't working. None of this is working. Remember Darfur? That's still right there. Totally failed state. Central African Republic, failed state. Niger, failed state. Nigeria, corrupt government. That's the place where this Boko Haram is now. And there again, those groups which terrorize entire areas of the globe do reach out to one another. And the Times article suggested that about all we can do is try to prevent those affiliations from happening. This is not a globe, as you look at it today, that is recognizable in terms of, the picture we hold in our head of how the world is situated and works. This is it's beyond destabilized. But I don't know. And you know what? This much I do know. It's all Barack Obama's fault. What the hell? So, if anyone has any brilliant thoughts, I have not listened to the punditry on this. I have read some, but I don't listen anymore. I can't. I just can't. I can't watch any of those TV shows. I simply have got to a point I'm allergic to them all. On occasion, one will slip by, but nah. So I really don't know what all the talking heads are talking about. But it's, I'm sure that the people that were beating the drums of war prior to our efforts to remove Saddam Hussein and establish democracy in Iraq, I'm willing to bet they're all over the talk shows, right, so telling us what we should be doing now. And one of the reasons I don't listen to these shows is because they trot out the same fools as experts, and they never contextualize anything or give us a little history of what these experts said 10 years ago, 15 years ago, so that we can decide whether or not to give them a moment's notice. And there's so many of them that have been so consistently wrong. And yet out they come. We're ill-served by our media. Good God, I've been babbling that long? Okay, so when we come back, I want to share with you this amazing story I heard yesterday. For those of you who heard it too, I'm sorry. But I think if you did hear the story, you will understand that you want to share it. And I just found it so extraordinarily fascinating and then provocative. So if you would indulge me, take a break, come back, and I want to tell you about a guy named Asa Carter. Okay.
Email your questions and comments to Lynn at pghcitypaper.com or call Lynn at 412-316-3381. Lynn Cullen Live will return in a moment.
Download the brand new CP Haps app and find out what's going on in Pittsburgh. It's the fun and free app that puts the most popular events at your fingertips. Text events to 77948 to download now and register to win tickets to WWE SmackDown at Console Energy Center on June 24th. The CP Haps app, brought to you by Pittsburgh City Paper.
So when you get to the corner of Smith and Orchard, you're going to want to take a left.
You are not going to
Then what you're going to do is turn onto Marcy
and Brad
Avenue.
just broke up,
and go past the first 3
she's
lights
happy
and then
about
take
it.
the next left.
I don't really
then drive
think
5
she's
more
happy,
blocks
but
and you should be
who
there.
am I to judge, right?
Park on the
Anyway,
right.
That's
I'll
what
see
I
you
heard
later
last
tonight.
night.
It's hard to concentrate on two things at once, like texting and driving. Stop the text, stop the wrecks. How will you stop texting and driving? Tell us at stoptextstopwrecks.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Have a question or an opinion? Call Lynn Cullen at 412-316-3381 or email lynn at pghcitypaper.com. Now, more with Lynn Cullen Live.
All righty, I was listening to WESA and yesterday, and this was on, I believe, All Things Considered. I'm not sure what show it was. Asa Carter was a KKK aficionado. He was a staunch anti-Semite, segregationist. He had his own radio show, I believe, in which he would read, it was called Essays on Liberty. Maybe it was just a segment of another show. I don't know. Essays on Liberty by Asa Carter. And he was well known. And the talk show he had was in Birmingham. Birmingham. I don't know how exactly it's pronounced, Alabama. Well, speaking of Alabama, you will recall that there was a governor there by the name of George Wallace. George Wallace, who famously stood in the doorway of, was it the University of Alabama? And gave a speech. Here's the line that people recognize most from it. I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny. Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. And the crowd goes wild. Asa Carter wrote that speech. George Wallace delivered it. Asa Carter wrote it. Asa Carter wrote much of the fiery rhetoric that came from the mouth of Governor George Wallace. But when Wallace started to evolve, and you may recall he did, Wallace saw that the times they were a-changin' and that he was going to be on the wrong side of history. And I believe it was after the assassination attempt on him by Arthur Bremer, when Wallace was paralyzed and had to be in a wheelchair, that he really changed. He actually went on, I think it was called an apology tour. He went to black churches and apologized. He sought out John Lewis, right, the congressman, who was so badly beaten in the civil rights era, and he begged him for his forgiveness. And John Lewis said that he absolutely felt that Wallace was sincere in his apology. And he did give Wallace his forgiveness. one person who was blown away by the apologies and the turnaround in George Wallace was Asa Carter, who felt that Wallace had sold out, had betrayed the cause, and Asa Carter sort of disappeared in the early 70s from Alabama. Nobody knew where he went. He just disappeared. I want to ask Jess. Jess, did you ever have to, in school, high school, have to read a book called The Education of Little Tree? No? Me either. But that's because I was already long gone. The Education of Little Tree. I know this story seems like, well, now what's she talking about? Talking about a book? Thought we were talking about George Wallace or this Asa person. The book is a story of a Cherokee boy, an orphan, who goes to live with his grandparents and learns about Native Americans' culture and history and the wisdom in that culture. And this book it was on the New York Times bestseller list for a gazillion years. It is one of those books Oprah has trumpeted. It is a book that is used in a lot of high schools. And it is a book that has touched the hearts of an awful lot of young people. That book was written by a guy named Forrest Carter. Not Asa Carter, Forrest Carter. Forrest Carter said he was a Cherokee, and he said that was his story. And it was essentially autobiographical. It wasn't. It took a long time before people figured it out, but Asa Carter was actually, not Asa Carter, Forrest Carter was interviewed by Barbara Walters on the Today Show in 1975. So he disappears in 71. Asa Carter disappears. In 75, Forrest Carter is on the Today Show being interviewed by Barbara Walters about this book, his moving story of being this Cherokee orphan boy. Well, one of his pals from the good old days, one of Asa Carter's pals from the good old days, sees the Barbara Walters interview. And he's looking and he says, "Oh my God, that's Asa." And here's what the guy says. "I literally got down on the floor laughing and rolling around. I called the wife. Asa's on TV. He's on with Barbara Walters. And I'm just rolling around on the floor laughing because Asa had fooled him. He'd fooled them all." So here's this KKK segregationist, anti-Semite hater. Disappears in 71, reemerges in 75 as a Cherokee Indian, having written this touchy-feely, sensitive, liberals would love book, and ends up getting on national television as a result. So this reporter working for the Alabama Journal gets wind of this, and this has to be the best word I've seen in a million years, he says, "I see this, and it just bumfuzzles me. Bumfuzzles me. I got to find out if this is Asa." So I started interviewing more and more people, and sure enough, in a few days, I get a call from Forrest Carter. And he said, "You don't want to hurt old Forrest now, do you, boy?" And I said, "Come off it, Asa. I recognize your voice. I'm not trying to hurt you, but I want to tell the truth about what's going on here." And Forrest Carter hung up. The story of Asa Carter's metamorphosis to Forrest Carter appears in the New York Times, 1976. And the sense would be that this book that all these little school children were reading would become what would be the word? It would be considered dishonest, outrageous, and would disappear. And it didn't. It didn't. People just ignored the fact that the hater Asa Carter and this seemingly liberal Native American Cherokee Forrest Carter were the same person, even though the New York Times told them. No one wanted to take it in. And then Forrest Carter, Asa Carter, died in 1979. And do you know what? 1980, University of New Mexico Press reissued Forrest Carter's so-called autobiography, The Education of Little Tree. And that's really when it took off. After the fact, after it was known that it was penned by this hater, George Wallace's speechwriter, that's when it really took off. Now, you can't read the book and imagine that a racist, Klansman, anti-Semite could have written it. And yet, a pal of Asa's from the good old days, the KKK days, said, "I picked up that book, I read it. I thought that was Asa." He said, "I realized everyone else was looking at it as some kind of a tree hugger book. But you know, that isn't the way Asa meant it. He said it's a government should leave me alone kind of a book. It's about the tyranny of government." Because in the book, the government does take Little Tree, the orphan, and put him in an orphanage. And the government does this, and the government does that to the Native Americans. So the government in that book is a tyrannical government in many ways, and a capricious government. And so Asa's old KKK buddies could read the book and see, that's Asa, but he's also putting something over on folks who don't even get what he's really saying. The fascinating thing about this is that nobody is in agreement on whether or not Asa Carter had the same kind of change of heart that, in fact, George Wallace did. George Wallace's change of heart was believed by many people to be genuine and to be sincere. I have to tell you, I interviewed George Wallace on that live on 5 show when he was in his wheelchair. And I remember thinking, oh, God, George Wallace is going to be on my show, that vile little beady-eyed jerk. And you know, I not only liked him, but I was moved by him because this is post See the Light Wallace. And I didn't think he was playing it for political purposes or whatever. He genuinely had changed. So is it conceivable that Asa Carter, after he sort of disappeared, really changed? Or are the friend who was rolling around on the floor watching him bamboozle Barbara Walters and everybody else, was the friend right? That he never changed. And in fact, the name he chose, Forrest, I'm blanking on the guy's full name, but the guy Forrest was the name of the founder of the KKK. So what a weird story. The book is still absolutely out there, The Education of Little Tree, and it is still sold as an autobiographical book by Forrest Carter. And if you find the book or pick it up, it will not in any way, anywhere mention that Forrest Carter was once Asa Carter. And the efforts of the reporter to out him and the New York Times to out him, it had no impact at all. So in that regard, Asa Carter absolutely pulled off this change of persona, if not change of heart. So, I mean, there's weird things too. He befriended this Jewish couple who owned a bookstore, who just adored him. And he was like the most virulent anti-Semite you can imagine. He was more of a Jew hater than of a black hater. He felt, as he said, that blacks were the virus that would destroy this country, but it was the Jews who put the virus and who were putting the virus in the very veins of the nation. It was the Jews behind it all. So the Jews were the worst. And yet, Forrest Carter befriended Jews. Forrest Carter, in writing his book, had a very sympathetic Jewish character in it. So, what do you think? Change of heart? Or a cynical bamboozler? I told this story to Susan, my sister, and she said, there's no change of heart. If someone has a change of heart, if Asa Carter had a change of heart, he would have had no reason to change his name. A change of heart would suggest that Asa Carter would step forward and say, I was wrong, like George Wallace did. But no, he didn't do that. He just took on a whole other persona. There was no mea culpa, none. No apology tour, none. But still, people come down on both sides of this. It's just, I find it a fascinating story. Here's the Jewish bookstore owner talking about him. He wore a cowboy hat, blue jeans, and he had a mustache. Dark complected, smile wrinkles around his eyes. He was so friendly. Here's one other little bit that might blow your mind. The first book that Forrest Carter wrote was a book that he self-published. And this was in 1973, 2 years after he disappears from Alabama, and before he writes this so-called autobiography. He writes a self-published novel called Gone to Texas. And he sends his novel out to everybody he can think of, Hollywood, in hopes somebody might make a movie, whatever. Someone in Hollywood did read it and liked it and made a movie. It's not called Gone to Texas. It's called The Outlaw Josie Wales. That movie starred Clint Eastwood. And it was Clint Eastwood who had read Forrest Carter's book and loved it and signed a film agreement with Forrest Carter to produce the film The Outlaw Josie Wales. So that was Forrest Carter as well. I don't know about you, but I think that is the most fascinating story. I did not tell it as well, obviously, as the piece, the NPR piece. Wow. Mind-blowing and thought-provoking. And it's a lot more fun to talk about that than to talk about ISIS. Let's take a break.
Stick around for more with Lynn Cullen Live after this.
I didn't know about chronic obstructive pulmonary disease until I took the wheel and lent my support to Drive for COPD. Help Americans take action against this leading cause of death by logging on to driveforcopd.org to learn more. I'm Nancy Cartwright, the voice of Bart Simpson, and I drive for COPD.
Well, the urban gardener is, I don't know about you, but there are a lot of plants that I had and bushes that didn't make it through the winter. And I'm not sure, there are some that look partially dead, half dead, who knows what dead. You don't know what to rip out. You don't know what to replace. My hydrangea didn't bloom this year. One dogwood didn't bloom, another one did. All kinds of weird stuff. And you sort of don't know who to turn to. I'm telling you, the urban gardener is a place that you can literally collar one of the women who own it and say, I don't know what to do about this plant. Should I ever even plant it again? Are we now in a different zone? What do we do? How do we know that we won't have another harsh winter like that? I don't know if they're going to be able to answer that, but, who knows? It's very difficult times for gardeners because it's difficult times for the plants, given the curious nature of our climate now. But the urban gardener has wisdom available, and that doesn't cost anything. Although if you want their design consultations, that'll cost a little bit, I would imagine. But if you say Lynn Cullen sent me, you're going to get a discount, as you will for any trees, shrubs, vines, perennials, annuals, herbs, and tchotchkes you might buy there. The Urban Gardener, I so love this place. Please check it out. It's so contained, just like an urban garden is. Contained. Check out their website, urbangardenerpgh.com. Go visit 1901 Brighton Road. Obviously, directions will be available on the website. And remember, you'll get some money off if you mention Lynn Cullen.
Pick up the Pittsburgh City Paper today. Still the #1 source for weekend fun in the Burgh. Go online now at pghcitypaper.com to vote in the 2014 Best of Pittsburgh Readers Poll. and type in promo code CPLBTIX for your chance to win Luke Bryan tickets. Vote now before it's too late. Pittsburgh City Paper, available at over 1,700 locations throughout Western Pennsylvania, and on the web at pghcitypaper.com, and on your smartphone at citypapermobile.com.
Now, it's back to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com.
Okay, so I said to a friend who was over the other day, what is with, and this is a question that has occurred to me before, and it must always be around this time, when all of a sudden I'll pick up a local paper and I'll see a picture of a kid down on hands and knees about to go pew, or with their thumb on a marble, right? Marble tournaments, marbles. And Jess, you haven't noticed that?
No.
Well, you don't read the paper? Marbles.
What?
And I asked my friend just the other day, what is it? Because she isn't from here either. I said, where you were from, did kids, play marbles as sort of, and compete at marbles, and all you have to do is pay a little attention, and you will note that Pittsburgh kids are forever winning the National Marble Championship. It's as if marbles, in this technological age, for some reason stuck here and still are played here, really played here by kids. So we couldn't figure it out. She didn't know either, although she'd sort of noted it too. Would you believe that today I open up the Wall Street Journal, and the Wall Street Journal has a front page article, datelined Pittsburgh. And it is about the fact that marbles are still, marbles are, I don't know, a game that people practice and work at, and that the best marble players are from Pittsburgh. The 91-year-old National Marbles Tournament, which starts today and runs through Thursday in Wildwood, New Jersey, claims to be the longest-running youth sports event in the country. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But playing marbles, do you know any kid who plays marbles? When I was a kid, we did have marbles. And I remember kids would trade marbles. And I remember there were different names for marbles. There were the steelies that were like made out of metal. And there were Aggies? I don't remember. But there were all these marbles. But I never knew there was a game you played. It says Pittsburgh has thousands of mibsters. That's what marble players are called. And about 40 national champions come from Pittsburgh. 40 come from Pittsburgh. Now, why Pittsburgh and marbles? The Wall Street Journal says this: the marble playing tradition in Pittsburgh was fueled by the booming glass industry, which preceded the making of steel industry in Western Pennsylvania. And the only marble manufacturer is 2 hours south of Pittsburgh in West Virginia. That's the only marbles that are still made in the United States are made in West Virginia. So there it is. And the piece is really about the Allegheny County Championships, and the fact that there are these familial dynasties of marble champions in Pittsburgh. Now, I guess the reason I've noted this is that it just seems every year, must be right around this time as they head off to the Nationals, that you start seeing stories about the latest Pittsburgh kid who's supposedly favored to win the national tournament. Now, I don't know if and it's boys and girls play. So, anybody know about that? I think it's fascinating. Well, I don't think it's fascinating. Here's how they say you play marbles. Players squat down and flick their shooter marble with their thumb at 13 target marbles. And this is all in a certain size circle. If the shooter marble knocks out a target but stays in the ring, the player gets to shoot again. The winner's the first person to knock out 7 marbles or who knocks out the most marbles after each player has shot 6 times. A winner can actually be declared without the other player even taking a shot. Games last 10 minutes at most, rain or shine. A really good shooter marble can cost up to $300. Is that more? And they have a picture of this kid. This is the same kid I saw in the Post-Gazette, I think, the other day. He was the favorite, but he came in second. The pressure got to him. Bobby Bobo Nar. Well, there you have it. Front page, Wall Street Journal today, about another special thing about Pittsburgh, that we are the marble champion of the world, or the country. Okay, grade, my obit for the day, and I know there's some big ones. I'm Chuck Noll's demise. I'm not going to add anything to that. He was a hell of a coach, obviously. And a seemingly interesting man, although not warm and cuddly. Kasem. And what was that Warhol woman? She died mtoo. One of Ultraviolet, I think.
Oh, really?
I think she's gone. Yeah. But no, I want to talk about Miriam Burbank. Miriam Burbank, New Orleans. 53 years old. Too young. And she'd always been so full of life that her family just didn't want her going out like most people do.
Wait,
did you hear about her?
The propped up.
Yes!
Yes, I saw a picture.
It's hard. I don't think this picture is going to show. They found a funeral home that let them do it.
Uh-huh.
They had her, she was embalmed and set up at a table with a menthol cigarette in her hand. And it is so creepy. What does it say? She, menthol cigarette in hand, disco balls overhead, a can of her Busch beer in front of her, and a bottle of Jack Daniels. She also was dressed in the New Orleans Saints team colors and also with matching nail polish. I don't think this is going to show, but my Lord. So that's the way she appeared if you went to her visitation.
I can post it online.
You can?
Yeah.
Okay. You can't really see her, but she's dead. You can't tell she's dead, but she's dead. God. I mean, to my Jewish sensibility, that is such a bizarre thing to do, that you just don't do that to a body. And I hope she'd be okay with it. I mean, I was waiting to read that these were her explicit instructions, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to this and that. Then I guess, if I think it's bizarre, so what? I mean, this is how she wanted to go out, but it doesn't read like that. It seems that it was her family who did this. And Oh. The guy at the funeral home said visitors attending other funerals and passersby were just marveling at May. And the funeral home was practically besieged by people wanting to pay their respects or gawk, as I suspect was the case. So, one other quickie that I have here in this today's Post-Gazette, Tom Ridge, former Pennsylvania governor, first Department of Homeland Security director, was in town. And he was rather, I'll read some quotes about his fellow Republicans, or some of his fellow Republicans. I'm not happy that there's a small group of people within the party that have an ideological mindset that I think is corrosive and disruptive and demeaning to the party's tradition and to its future. Hear, hear. So when I rail about these, I'm railing. I really find them dangerous. Guess what? It sounds like Ridge considers them dangerous, too. Dangerous for the future of his party, the very life of his party. But also when he says corrosive and disruptive, he's talking about corrosive and disruptive to the country, to our body politic. He goes on to talk about the Founding Fathers and how in their brilliance they created a government that was all about balance and compromise. You cannot study political science and the U.S. Constitution without seeing that that's what the Founding Fathers had in mind. Not too much power anywhere, and this balance. And the only progress that ever gets made is through compromise. You give a little. Of course, we know that the current iteration of the Republican Party doesn't compromise at all. Doesn't negotiate. And he said, Ridge, I'm really troubled by these hard-right, ideological, unbending, my way or the highway mindset. And then also about his party, Tom Ridge said this, I think we're just flat wrong on immigration. This notion that somehow we're going to identify and send 12 million people back is ludicrous. It's outrageous. It's not dealing with reality. Not dealing with reality is the hallmark of the current Republican Party. And he says so look at the strength of the words he's using there. Ludicrous, corrosive, outrageous, not dealing with reality, my way or the highway, unbending. Sounds like he sees. Now, the thing is, he likes to call it a small group. Well, I don't know that it's such a small group because it has managed to pretty much take over the Republican Party. Because, as Eric Cantor will tell you, you can never be right-wing enough for these folks. So, I found that interesting. Tom Ridge out of sorts and out of step with the party that he loved. I don't think it sounds like he loves it anymore. All right, that's it. Tomorrow, Susan will join us from St. Louis, and I hope you will too. Have a great day.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper, Steel City Media, and its advertisers.